Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the leader of majority in his remarks, and I stand to support the motion. And Mr. Speaker, if there was a summary of the person of the departed President Mwai Kibaki, what he was and what he did, I think your speech contains, Mr. Speaker, quite a lot of things that we need to know about this great man. And together with the speech that the leader of majority has made, I think the record of the House at the end, in our usual tradition, I hope, Mr. Speaker, we can prepare a volume of the Hansard to give to the family of President Kibaki. Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning, you have covered quite a bit about what Kibaki was and what he did. The leader majority has done the same. Talking about infrastructure, we know what Kibaki did in the improvement of infrastructure in this country, including some of the ongoing projects. We know what he did in the area of universal free primary education. It was like it was something unattainable, but he did it. And he did it in such a way that for the first time, Kenyans realized that actually even at the primary school level, government could be involved in building infrastructure for schools. I think a lot of schools over his time and period began to see changes in the infrastructure of schools and in the field of education generally. Mr. Speaker, also in the area of health, again, quite phenomenal developments during the tenure of President Kibaki. The other thing that I appreciated about him, and showing that government does not always to use the coercive instruments of state to make citizens do what they are, or carry out their obligations, was in the area of revenue collection. You remember President Kibaki pleading to Kenyans to pay tax and voluntarily. And I think there's a lesson to be learned by the Kenya Revenue Authority, that using the coercive arms of the state normally probably is not the best way for the tax collector. Now, but Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about Kibaki, really the man, in politics. And begin by saying, if there was ever a politician that loved Parliament, it was Mwai Kibaki. Mwai Kibaki enjoyed this institution. And you needed to be in the House when President Kibaki was addressing Parliament. Unfortunately, these days, Mr. Speaker, we don't have anybody in the gallery. But people would come in droves when there was a controversial issue to be discussed or debated in Parliament, and true to form, some of the best speeches will be made by President Kibaki. And whenever you saw President Kibaki, he used to address his Parliament in two components. He started by addressing the formal part of his address. When you saw him looking at the press gallery and the gallery, then, Mr. Speaker, there will be silence, complete silence in the House, because he did it effortlessly and very eloquently. And I think to his death, he respected the institutions of Parliament. Not Parliament as an arm of the executive. There are a lot of things that happened during Kibaki's time where he eventually agreed with Parliament. Although the executive were planning other things, he eventually agreed to take the position that Parliament took. For example, the creation of although it started during President Moi's time, but truly to have an independent Parliament by the creation of the Parliamentary Service Commission, and creation and enlarging the Constituency Development Fund, which was very difficult to do in earlier times. I remember when Minister Mwai was trying to move the budget, and there was a stalemate because members of parliament insisted that there must be sufficient allocations to the Constituency Development Fund. And President Kibaki, understanding that development has got to go to the grassroots, instructed Mwai at that time that, that stalemate was totally unnecessary, and we were able then to begin to see the difference in terms of size, the quality of allocations which were being made, the Constituency Development Fund. And Mr. Speaker, many times he came to Parliament. Remember when we were trying to have the grand coalition after the violence in 2007? He came to Parliament personally to convince members of Parliament and participate in the process of trying to bring peace to the country. And, Mr. Speaker, this was possible because the President Kibaki was always looking at the big picture, never looking at little things that cause differences unnecessarily. And if it meant agreeing with those that he didn't share ideas, but the big picture obliged him to come to terms because the country needed to move in a certain direction, President Kibaki would do it. And what I loved about President Kibaki, you get very few leaders. In fact, I am hoping for this Kenyan Republic to grow to a better democracy. I'm hoping that we will have somebody in State House in the character and in the style of President Mwai Kibaki. Because President Mwai Kibaki, I remember when people went to see him, and you had a long wish list. If it is something that didn't fall on his tenure, his responsibility or jurisdiction as president, he would tell you, you're in the wrong place. You're in the wrong place. Go to the people who actually have those responsibilities. And to that extent, and I hope all leaders will be like that, and should be like that he would listen, and if you're right, he would agree with you. If you're wrong, he would tell you off. The difference between that leadership and why it worked, that President Kibaki was prepared to listen to the other side, to listen to contrary opinion. President Kibaki never wanted people to tell him what he wants to hear. He would be happier with you if you're telling him what he needs to know. And if you want to tell him what he wants to hear, very quickly he'll tell you, wacha fitina, wacha kizungu hiyo, sema huko nje. And that is the problem with Africa. That's the problem with the third world, that we have leaders who never want to listen, who never want to entertain the contrary opinion. That's why democracy can never thrive in Africa and in the third world, because we all want yes men. We all want yes men. And the greatness of President Kibaki was that, even when he was government, he would associate himself with those in opposition. I remember when we were the seven-bearded sisters, and we were not well regarded in Parliament, President Kibaki took upon himself to visit our constituencies. He went to Abuya's constituency. He went to Shibule Wasoma's constituency. In fact, I was to be the last person. The day he was to come to my constituency, President Moi, what is this political tourism in which the vice president is engaged in. I'd built a little house because I didn't have a house at that time, hoping that President Kibaki would come to my home. But that was not to be. But he valued that friendship because subsequently he came to Uganda and he came to my village. And as president, he also came to Uganda when I was a member for Uganda. And there was a lot of criticism against Kenya about extrajudicial killing. And there was the meeting of the International Human Rights Commission to State House as ministers in his government. I remember the Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga was there, Minister Saitoti was there, Minister Martha Karua was there, Mr. Wako, I think, was there as Attorney General, and civil servants were there. And we demanded that the civil servants walk out of the room, that we wanted now to talk as politicians, to talk about Kenya and these adverse reports that were being made about Kenya. There was a chopper waiting outside State House. He was supposed to go to a formal function at Gilgil. And President Kibaki, just ordered, those top civil servants, including the Director of Intelligence, out so that we can have a discussion. And instead of sending the minister in charge at that time, he decided that we go as a delegation and accept the criticism that had been leveled against Kenya. And we went to Geneva to defend ourselves. I think Mutula Senior was also there. And to have people like Mutula Kilonzo Senior on your side of cabinet was something quite good, because he was very frank, even though he belonged to the other side. And I think Moses would support me in this, because Moses was also quite like Mutula Kilonzo Senior. And when we went to Geneva, and Miguna was also part of the delegation. And you can imagine the discussions we were having in Geneva after the president had allowed us to go. But what I'm trying to say, he allowed us, even though, because we differed with the position that the civil servants were taking on the question of extrajudicial killing. And when we convinced him, he agreed that we got to go to Geneva and tell the world the truth and what Kenya was going to do about it. Now, one of the things that I must say that happened to President Kibaki, which probably President Uhuru doesn't have, is that his first vice president, who was a brilliant Kenyan, the late Wamalo Kijana, gave him a supportive role. He didn't call the president names out there, but he offered the president a supportive role at a time when he had suffered injury and was indisposed. And then subsequently, after the death of Wamalo Kijana, it was followed by Awori, Uncle Moody, who was equally, gave him a supportive role. And he was not by any means a sycophant in that cabinet. And then you had Vice President Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, who had stood actually against Kibaki. He had stood against Kibaki, but he gave a supportive role. That's why Kibaki was able to achieve a lot of these good things. And when Raila and his team joined, and Raila as Prime Minister, and we were two parties, one which initially was in the opposition, we were two parties in government. But I can tell you where Kibaki lies. He will tell you that when they were working with Raila Amolo Odinga, we had a lot of differences, even in cabinet. But as a government, he had a supportive role. And that's why I think in those 10 years, he was able to make those achievements. And vice presidents who do that tend to make it. Biden made it. Kijana Wamala nearly made it. Moi made it. And Kibaki made it under very difficult 3 months to enable, at least to finish his tenure. And you have seen since the handshake. And, my learned friend, Moses Wetangula, was really part of the handshake. It's only when people are thinking about power and the positions that people go their separate ways. But I'm sure in his mind and commitment, there's a lot that could have been done during this presidency, absent the dysfunction in government. Not everybody can be perfect. Even Churchill was not perfect. He lost an election. But they say he probably was the greatest, and yet came out to be one of the greatest prime ministers in British history. And he had many faults. And even after winning a war, he was defeated in an election. So President Kibaki was not necessarily perfect. He was working under a particular environment with politicians who make too much noise, with politicians who, at that time were brought up in such a way that, handouts was probably the most important thing to get from political positions. But President Kibaki told us, that is not the way, no handouts. Government can provide revenue to build schools, to build health centers, to build infrastructure, so long as you had the right people. And therefore, President Kibaki could not miss Speaker Kenneth Lusaka, because, Mr. Speaker, I think you're a man of many talents, but you needed a president who could notice those talents. And then he didn't have anybody that he could protect to the end, albeit what they had done. Who did not know that my friend Kiraitu and Murungaru were the most powerful people in government, particularly in the first 6, 7 months. Yeah, but when trouble came, they had to go and sort out their problems. And President Kibaki was the first to tell them, just go and come back when you have sorted the problem. Some of them never sorted out those problems. Who did President Kibaki love more than Muraria? I don't think there is anybody who was as close to President Kibaki as Honorable Muraria. And I think that's why he was really made the finance minister, because of his closeness to President Kibaki. And President Kibaki all the time was watching what was happening at the Treasury. He needed a loyal friend. But when Anglo-Leasing came, David Muraria had to fight for his freedom in the courts until his death, unfortunately. In fact, he died before the conclusion of that case. So we need leadership that loves institutions. Mboya said, a country is as strong as its institutions. I think many of the leaders we have had before do not respect institutions. Do not believe in the institutions of parliament, that parliament can differ with the executive, that is not part of the template of our work to always agree with the executive, even if the executive could be having an overwhelming majority in the House. Indeed, when we were one-party system, the most virulent opposition came, in Parliament during the one-party days. People like J.M. Kariuki, who are here. People like George Anyona, who are here. People like my friend Philomena Chelagat, the things they used to say in this house, some of the members here could never say them. And Martin Shikuku, of course, Martin Shikuku was the best of them all. People like Muliro, who could dare face the president, that we didn't gain independence to kill each other. That is when he supported the J.M. Kariuki report. He differed with the government. He was a member of the cabinet. He differed with the cabinet. And that's how he ceased to be a cabinet minister. But these days, these times, people tend to love parliament that is user-friendly to the executive. A country cannot develop when Parliament does not play its role institutionally as required under the Constitution. You may win the day, but you may not have a great country at the end if you weaken Parliament. If you only want courts, a system of courts that make decisions in support of the executive, you can never have strong institutions. In fact, the greatest democracies in this country have emerged because of strong legal systems, including the United States of America. Some of the most important decisions that we put in our courts were delivered in the very early days during the presidency of Jefferson. I can see my learned friend from Nyamira smiling. In the United Kingdom, where you had absolute monarchies, it is the system of courts in their many divisions that brought order in the realm. So we must believe in strong institutions. And I'm urging the courts that, whatever we do as an executive or as a parliament, please continue being strong, because if democracy dies, you will not have done something in honor of President Mwai Kibaki. And the reason why I'm saying this, there was a time when there was a big rumor, and it was not a rumor because it later on knew to be true, when everybody in the Kibaki government, the first Kibaki government, wanted Amos Wako out as Attorney General. It was quite a fight. People were being approached to be recruited in that position. But President Kibaki said he needed somebody who had learned on the ropes, like Wako, who would tell him, would advise him, would be a true legal advisor. And I've seen, whenever you confronted President Kibaki with a position and say, Mr. President, you cannot have it this way, so long as it was right, President Kibaki would listen to you. He would listen to you. He was prepared to change his mind. Now, if you have a leadership that cannot be advised, cannot listen to reason, cannot listen to what the representatives of the people are saying, like ourselves, and they're the ones who wield executive power, then that is the beginning of the end for any nation. And I think this great man who is lying in state in the precincts of Parliament, it'll take us a long time to find a gentle giant like him who is a good listener and who would rule not with a cudgel. He will not weaponize the presidency to settle scores, who wanted to do justice for the country. I think that if ever there was a man to be honored, because many of them have gone whom we never honored. The great men of this country we never honored. And I think it is very bad that, in this country we tend to honor leaders who make it, unfortunately, like President Kibaki, to the top. But we have got many great leaders who suffered for this country. People like J.M. Kariuki, we remember them when it is necessary in an occasion, or we want to politicize, his life for our own good. We got the families of people like Anyona who really suffered. Or the lady called Chelagat, that lady in Parliament, when it was very difficult to say the kind of things she was to say. And, no Kenyan would ever remember Chelagat. Not even in the corridors here. You would see a picture of Philomena Chelagat, because we forget. At least if you go to the courts, thanks to Chief Justice Mtunga, if you go to what used to be dungeons there in the Supreme Court, where many of us were taken before, you will see a bit of the history of this country, not just about the judiciary. You'd see, events and photographs and paintings of people who contributed to making Kenya a democratic nation. So I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, that as we remember
President Kibaki that one of these days, we're going to probably have a hall of fame here. Remember the Arguing Skodek of this world? A great barrister. Who remembers Arguing Skodek? You go to parliaments all over the world, people like those are remembered. Yeah, but here, I think the only thing is partly colonial history. You see pictures of people who are speakers here. And I'm not talking about Speaker Lusaka. But speakers are not by themselves the parliament. The parliament is us and everybody. So I hope, so I hope when one of these days when people from Bugoma are walking along the corridors of this parliament, they will see a photograph or a painting of Moses Wetangula or Mutula Kilonzo, who in a few years has made a difference, or Wambua, who wants somebody to be number 2. Yeah, which level? Let me say something about it, because you know President Kibaki was also number 2. Yeah. Let me say something about this thing. At the end of the day, the exercise of presidential powers rests on the president. Rests on president. To treat the presidency as an arranged marriage, I think is wrong. And arranged marriages never really work. Never really work. Don't force yourself into a marriage. Never force yourself into a marriage. You'll be like being forced into a marriage like Marie Antoinette. Yeah, her mother married, arranged a marriage between Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. And she found out that Louis XVI was not really a man. Yeah. I will not go to the details. But arranged marriages are just like that. May I believe that when you are a lady, a gracious lady, and you want to enter into a union, you make some kind of choice. Mr. Speaker.
You want to be informed, Senator Orengo?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Senator Chula Yako.
Thank you very much, my senior. This point of forced marriage only works if one party submits. I just wanted to inform my senior. The forced marriage only works if one party submits. So when one party has the potential to rebel, the marriage breaks down. That is the problem we have had in Kenya. You get into a forced political marriage, then one rebels. I think it can work if one of the partners submits to the other, so that it fits what has processed our family. So I hope those who are forcing themselves into political marriage, one will submit. Thank you.
Submission sometimes is not enough. It's performance. I'm just taking a little bite on this ongoing debate that whoever is involved in that process, let ultimately, because I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, let me predict something. The next president is going to secure a 5-year term, depending on what he does in the first 1 year. And in the first, and in the next 1.5 years, he can secure his second term. But if you have a relationship where there's dysfunction, you know, that president falls the moment you're sworn in. And Kenyans don't have space for that. People are actually suffering in this country. When I walk out there, I mean, there's suffering out there. Kenya, not out of our fault of the government or anybody, with the COVID pandemic and now with Ukraine, there are a lot of problems out there. And in order to turn things around, and a lot of things have been done, like building the expressway, but are we going to be able to pay for it amid rises in the cost of living and fuel prices? Are we going to be able to do it? And therefore, the next president, and I know who that person is going to be, and I can see him already smiling because he knows what I know, and he knows what I know is true, that from that very first month, like Kibaki, the very first month when the NAC government came to power, the very first month, and my friend Moses Wetangula was there, the very first 1 month, things were happening. And the public was having confidence. Kenyans were the happiest people under the sun because government was performing from the very first day of its taking authority in the land. And therefore, I hope that President Kibaki leaves us with a sense of goodwill in the nation. We have peaceful elections, and that we learn from his very rich legacy what we can do to turn this country around. And that's not to say, Mr. Speaker, that he didn't have his faults. Yeah. I, as a person, I had many differences with President Kibaki when we were sitting on the opposite side of the House. But he enjoyed a good debate. And the other good thing about him, he always stayed behind in the House here. He would spend hours until midnight. He had a famous tree there, which some of you know what happens under that tree. Yeah, but he would listen. He would be having camaraderie with members. And after a debate where you are having political differences, you are arguing against each other, then you go for a cup of tea or a glass of something, and then you continue the debate and come into a semblance of understanding. Let me finish my speech by saying my just two experiences with President Kibaki. One, whenever I used to talk to Kibaki about Arguins Kodek, he could spend an hour talking about Kodek. I think that's the politician he admired most. And if you go to the Hansard, you'd realize why. Because Kodek liked humor, he liked wit, he was good on his feet, just like Kibaki. I remember one of the cases that Arguins Kodek did when he was defending. Those days, people would be arrested for loitering with intent. And Arguins' defense in court is that, if you are a normal human being, you cannot loiter without intent. Most of the time when you're walking, you must have some intentions of going somewhere. And Kibaki would repeat that one. But the other thing that I want to say that I remember him for was when we were having a final meeting at Harambee House in the presence of President Kikwete, Mkapa, and Kofi Annan. And he was there alone sitting with His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, discussing the trouble that had come out after the 2007 elections. And the only person who was called to that room was Wako, as Attorney General. And Raila Amolo Odinga insisted that he needed his lawyer to be in that room. I was privileged to be in that room. And many questions were thrown around in that room, arguments. And when we reached some understanding, when it was suggested, and of course outside the president's office, everybody who was who in government was standing outside, knocking the door, wanting to come in. And Kibaki would keep on saying, no, don't allow them. They are what a letter to fitina, he would say in Kiswahili. So at the end of the day, when an agreement was reached, I was dispatched with Wako to go to Serena and do a draft, which was signed that very day. Now, I can imagine that if we had all receded to our teams, the Grand Coalition government would not have been formed. But President Kibaki has a sense of saying, you know, wachana na watu ambao wako nje. And that goes for somebody who was seeing a bigger picture and what needed to be done at that moment. I mourn President Kibaki. I mourn with other Kenyans that President Kibaki goes down in history as one of the greatest parliamentarians, one of the greatest debaters, one of the best presidents, and one of the best academic scholar that this country has ever produced. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, I now propose the question, which is that aware that the late Emilio Mwai Kibaki, CGH, was the third president of the Republic of Kenya between December 2002 and March 2013, in addition to serving as the fourth vice president of the Republic of Kenya between 1978 and 1988. Noting that the late former president, Mwai Kibaki, had a long, illustrious career in public service, spanning over 50 years, where he served as a member of parliament for Donholm and Othaya constituencies for 10 parliamentary terms from 1963 to 2013, and as a cabinet minister in various ministries for 28 years from 1963 to 1991. Appreciating the late President Mwai Kibaki's work in setting the foundation for the Kenya's socio-economic turnaround and infrastructure